Is the loss of Sammy Davis Jr., who died today at his Beverly Hills home. He was a man of so many parts and so many contradictions, all of them on display in a lifetime of public performing.
When they watched Sammy Davis Jr. in 1990, spectators assumed he was taking his last bow. Behind the lights, they were unaware that they were seeing a captive. His locker area was surrounded by mob enforcers. Months prior, doctors had detected throat cancer. Nevertheless, Davis chose to conceal the news. Why? Damned men's risky gaming left me $7 million in the red. Davis would not budge, not even when Frank Sinatra pleaded with him and showed up with a $500,000 check to rescue his friend. He was sentenced to death during his last performance, not a celebration. Born on December 8, 1925 in Harlem Hospital, Sammy Davis Jr. entered the world immediately into the limelight. His mom and dad were traveling vaudeville artists with the Will Maston Trio. Little Sammy remained in New York with his grandma while his parents went on tour. But when he reached 3, his parents split up, and his father started taking him on tour to groom him for a career in performing instead of a typical childhood. After then, Sammy's life took a somewhat extraordinary turn. Sammy was busy practicing his dancing moves for total strangers, while his classmates were busy studying the letters. He was more than an extra. He was the show. Adding Sammy Davis Jr. to the lineup, the band rebranded as the Will Maston Trio. Will Maston and Sammy's dad devised a bizarre scheme to draw attention to his talent while avoiding legal issues related to child labor. They acted as though young Sammy had a growth problem and was truly an adult. Sammy was presented to the world at the tender age of 4 as Silent Sam, a 44-year-old man. To maintain the charade, they outfitted him with little outfits, handed him a rubber cigar, and instructed him to remain silent when off stage. There was no truth to it, yet for a long time it served its purpose. He was thought to be an adult, not a youngster, by those around him. He was constantly reminded to behave like an adult, so he avoided socializing with others his own age and never attended school. It was isolating and perplexing, yet it propelled him to stardom at a young age. He was never one to pursue formal education. At least once, Sammy skipped school. He lived out of suitcases his whole life as a child performer, practicing and touring. Whenever the law came too close, he would at most have part-time instructors. He was still unable to read anything beyond comic novels by the time he reached puberty. He felt terrible about it, but couldn't find the time to rectify it. His life took a further turn in 1943 when he was enlisted in the Army and sent to the 1st Integrated Regiment. It was then that a sergeant saw his exceptional intelligence and began teaching him to read. Someone believed in Sammy's intellect as much as his abilities. What he learnt in those barracks, which he referred to as his savior, would remain with him always. Sammy had an innate talent that stunned everyone, even though he never studied music in the conventional sense. He was able to play the drums, trumpet, piano, and vibraphone by ear by the time he was 7 years old, without the need of printed music or lessons. He did little more than observe, listen, and imitate. Along with studying with the premier tap dancer of the day, Bill Bojangles Robinson, he also astonished elder musicians with his drumming. When it came to performing, Sammy was more than simply a musician or dancer. Not only that, he had a gift for song, mime, and humor. He had spent years studying on the fly, night after night, and it showed in his energetic and varied performances. In the same year, at the tender age of 7, Sammy also had his cinematic debut. He was in the short film Rufus Jones for President, which also included blues icon Ethel Waters. The film explored the outlandish concept of a young black child running for president in the 1930s. Sammy was absolutely fantastic as the lead and danced the night away. With an all-black ensemble and Sammy's skill shining through in every scene, the film was nonetheless a watershed event, despite its era-specific cliches. Even though he wouldn't make another film appearance for over 20 years, it marked the beginning of his extensive association with the entertainment industry. Sammy Davis Jr. was enlisted in the United States Army at the tender age of 17. Army during the year 1943. The military didn't care if he was short, 5 or 6 year, or heavy, 120 pounds. At Fort Warren in Wyoming, where the regulations may have changed on paper but not in people's hearts, he was thrust into a newly integrated unit. Because his father and uncle were also entertainers, Sammy had a somewhat privileged upbringing, shielded from the harsh realities of bigotry. However, that security was suddenly revoked by the Army. All of a sudden, he was nothing more than a black adolescent surrounded by guys who had made it their goal to destroy him, neither a performer nor a star. As soon as it began, the abuse began. As he slept one night in the barracks, a platoon of white troops ambushed him. They covered him in white paint. The act was not a joke, but rather a message. Their goal was to diminish him to nothingness by wiping his identity clean. More than just physical wounds, tragedy left emotional scars. Even though the Army had amended the regulations, the animosity persisted, and the fact that it occurred within an integrated unit only made matters worse. A barrage of assaults ensued. Repeatedly, a few of his guys started peeing in his beverages. He'd go get a drink and smell its warm, sour, embarrassing flavor. It was more than simply bullying, it was an act of physical coercion designed to make him swallow their animosity. Even when he spoke about it on TV years later, the anguish was evident in his eyes. It takes time for that type of pain to subside. On top of everything else, he was frequently physically assaulted. In fights he had no business getting into, he fractured his nose 3 times. The assailants' goal was more than physical harm. They intended to show him that he would never be considered equal to them. Finally, he lost it one day. Sammy struck a white soldier after he made a racist comment. In spite of his injuries, the man got back up and remarked, "Well, you beat me, but you're still a nigger." Sammy felt the impact of that statement more than any blow. At that moment, he understood that the rules were predetermined and would not be changed, no matter his resistance. Even after he won a battle, many still thought he was weak. The light bulb moment came when he resolved to use his skill rather than his fists in battle. Plus, he had company. The one person who could keep him grounded was a sergeant named Williams, who became his mentor. For Williams, it was about turning that suffering into performance, meaning, and survival. Something else altered the course of his life irrevocably in 1954, several years later. On his way from Sin City to Hollywood, in his shiny new Cadillac Eldorado, he was involved in a collision with 2 old ladies, sending him slamming his face into the wheel. A perilous ornamental spike sunk into his eye socket from the center of that steering wheel. In the end, the eye couldn't be saved by the doctors. In the aftermath of his accident, Cadillac decided to remove the spike from all subsequent models, as he later learned. Upon waking up, Sammy's first thought was, "Can I still dance?" Rather than safety concerns or legal action. He was more concerned with continuing to perform than with gaining recognition or even saving face. Something changed inside of him while he lay in the hospital bed looking at the ceiling. His Jewish buddy Eddie Cantor had given him a mezuzah to wear as a lucky charm, and he had always worn it. On the night of the collision, he completely neglected to wear it, and that remained with him. He read about the Jewish people's history while he was healing, and something clicked. The suffering, the persecution, and the eventual triumph over adversity. It brought back memories of his own people's fight. He found new meaning in life via Judaism. He formally converted in 1960 after waiting a few more years. A faith that truly got him had been discovered. But that wasn't the first time his life took off. It began in 1947. He was a member of the Will Maston Trio that made an appearance at New York's Capitol Theater that year. Frank Sinatra was the main attraction, and Sammy, who was just 21 years old, stunned the audience, not to mention Sinatra. Everything changed that night. Sinatra went above and beyond the call of duty when he informed Sammy, "You're staying at my place in Palm Springs until you get back on your feet." His generosity extended much beyond the sending of flowers when Sammy had that terrible tragedy years later. It was authority. They worked together and used it to make a difference. The Rat Pack was once just a hangout before it became a brand and a company. Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall's residence was a gathering place for a handful of renowned names in the late 1940s, including Mickey Rooney, Nat King Cole, and Errol Flynn. The moniker Rat Pack came from a joke Bacall made about how they appeared. Even while the lads were more comfortable referring to it as the Clan or the Summit, the fabled version didn't materialize until the early 1960s. Peter Lawford, Joey Bishop, Sammy Davis Jr., Dean Martin, Frank Sinatra, and Dean Martin ruled Las Vegas at that time. The chemistry, not the names, was what made it electrifying. They would spend the day filming Ocean's 11 in 1960 and then play at the Sands Hotel in the evenings. They performed an unscheduled gig one night, and the audience went absolutely crazy. Their performance became an instant sensation as word of mouth traveled rapidly. A total of 34,000 spectators flocked to the Sands over the course of 4 weeks to see the spectacle. The film Ocean's 11 also debuted that year. It was more than a film, it was a continuation of their performance. Acting out the role of army pals executing a casino robbery, they were only expressing themselves on television. Seeing them on screen and then seeing them perform live that night gave the film a more authentic feel. Additionally, this film was a tremendous hit for Sammy Davis Jr. In a cast where white actors predominated, it was unusual to have a black performer given equal billing. Following Ocean's 11, they went on to collaborate on other films such as Sergeants 3. Following Lawford's ouster, Bing Crosby took over for Robin and the Seven Hoods. Although critics sometimes panned their films as vanity projects, the public adored them. All of the films were commercial successes, but Ocean's 11 sparked a new series that would last for decades. A hard routine, though, lay behind all that enjoyment. Their day would begin at the crack of dawn on Ocean's 11, and they would hit the stage for not one, but 2, or even 3 performances that night. Reprise Records recorded their performances from a run of 15 gigs in a row in Chicago. In between, there were crazy parties, and they appeared to pour an unlimited amount of energy into their performance, which was both exciting and tiring. Subsequently, Sammy Davis Jr. confessed that he slept very little, sometimes only a few hours, before resuming his makeup routine before sunrise. However, not everyone let loose. Dean Martin was reserved away from the stage, in contrast to his inebriated performance on stage. Sinatra and Davis lived up to their wild reputations. It irritated Sinatra that he would frequently forego the after-parties in favor of sleeping. Then there was the underreported, alternative version of events. Sammy Davis Jr. was still not treated fairly, even though he was performing on the largest stages in Las Vegas. Back then, black artists couldn't access the main door, couldn't stay at the same hotels, and couldn't even play at the same casinos. They had to enter through the kitchen. Nobody was immune to this treatment, not even Lena Horne. Some hotel employees would set fire to her old bedding as she checked out. The pool would be emptied and cleansed if a black performer even dared to dip a toe in it. Davis had to face the terrible truth every day, even while hundreds of people were cheering him on at the sands. Nonetheless, he had company. Sinatra was on his side. Sinatra successfully threatened to cancel his own gigs unless the Sands Hotel allowed Davis to stay when they failed to provide him with a suitable room. Sinatra would always make it known that Sammy was not welcome at any casino appearances. The Strip started to change because of that type of power. But there was a cost to such authority. The FBI kept tabs on Sinatra for decades, since his circle of pals included not only Hollywood insiders, but also prominent gangster Sam Giancana. In 1962, Sinatra was held responsible for the failure of a CIA-backed operation between Giancana and the Kennedys. In an effort to maintain good relations with the mafia leaders, Giancana had the Rat Pack perform free concerts at the Villa Venice nightclub in Illinois, which was controlled by the mafia. Sammy Davis Jr. and Kim Novak's relationship, on the other hand, was more than simply a Hollywood romance. It was a risky bet with potentially fatal outcomes. In 1956, it all started when they crossed paths on The Steve Allen Show. With the Will Maston trio, Sammy had already achieved stardom, and Novak was on the rise as Columbia Pictures' Golden Girl. They became close friends. As she was filming Vertigo, Davis would sneak onto the set and pose as a photographer so she could get close to her. In a playful manner, she caught him and said, "Have you ever considered removing the lens cover?" As soon as it began, it developed into something more serious, although it was still flirting. While in Chicago that fall, Novak went to Che Paris to see Davis play, and the two became even closer. She was spending Thanksgiving with him at his house by then. In his desperation to see her, Sammy rescheduled his Vegas performance and traveled to Chicago just to visit her parents by Christmas. That was daring for 1957, far daring for their world. Behind the scenes, Columbia Pictures chief Harry Cohn was fuming. He was a control freak who regarded Kim Novak as an investment and a product of his own making. Aside from idolizing despots like Mussolini, Cohn had links to the mob and wiretapped his own studios. According to a gossip column, he became quite angry when he learned that Sammy and Kim could have even sought a marriage license. He would stop at nothing to prevent an interracial romance from undermining his control over Novak's reputation. Mickey Cohen, a gangster, arrived in January 1958 as the threat, not attorneys. At the racecourse, he confronted Sammy's father with a harsh ultimatum: marry a black lady within the next 24 hours, or else he would face severe consequences. Cohn had actual connections, the type that did more than destroy careers. They took lives. These threats weren't hollow. Anxiety gripped Sammy. He sought assistance from Sam Giancana, the mob boss from Chicago, but even Giancana refused to defend him in Hollywood. While staying at the Sands Hotel that night, Davis quickly perused his contact book in an effort to find a potential bride. Not long after Sammy declared, "I'm looking for someone to marry," Arthur Silver, his companion, watched in terror as the mob reportedly abducted Davis. Reportedly, he was dragged into a vehicle in Las Vegas and taken to the desert. They reminded him that a vehicle accident had already taken one of his eyes, and now they were threatening to steal the other. They threatened to blind him, break his legs, and bury him in an unmarked grave unless he avoided Novak. The strain finally got to him that night. Davis, who was absolutely terrified, started searching through his contact book for a potential spouse. The 23-year-old singer Lorraine White, with whom he had a brief romance, was ultimately contacted. She was in agreement. At the Sands Hotel in Las Vegas, they exchanged vows on January 10, 1958. It wasn't a love tale at all. It was a narrative of survival. According to reports, Davis allegedly paid White $10,000 to $25,000 to make it happen. Stay married for a short time, then discreetly split. That was the idea. What was at risk was clear to her. The happy couple posed for wedding photographs next to a giant martini glass and a happiness cake. Tragically, though, the reality was far worse. On that same night, Sammy cracked under the strain. He attempted to strangle Lorraine White in a fit of fury while driving to the hotel suite after consuming a large amount of alcohol. He was removed from her by his buddy Arthur Silver Jr. Things escalated further in the apartment, where Silver discovered Davis with a pistol to his own head when he entered. He sat on his chest till he passed out, having tackled him just in time. "Why won't they let me live my life?" Davis questioned, his voice tinged with anguish, the question that would follow him forever. There was a brief 8-month marriage. They were never a relationship, as they never lived together. Everything had ended by September 1958. Lorraine claimed cruelty as her grounds for filing for a divorce. Davis went on to marry Swedish actress May Britt in 1960, after Lorraine fell into oblivion following the breakup. The last insult was then delivered. Davis was set to play at the 1960 inauguration after tirelessly campaigning for John F. Kennedy. Kennedy, however, did not welcome him back when he wed May Britt. Kennedy was careful not to alienate Southern Democrats, even if Davis had been instrumental in his victory, because interracial marriage remained unlawful in the majority of U.S. states. Someone shoved him aside. He just stated, "I understand," rather than arguing. "I appreciate your call." Davis once again shocked the nation 12 years later, this time by embracing President Nixon. On stage at a 1972 Republican rally was where it took place. Though he had always been a Democrat, Davis had changed his vote and even contributed to Nixon's re-election campaign. After receiving the gold record for the Candyman from Nixon, Davis embraced him tightly. There was a ruckus about the photo because both his black supporters and white supremacists perceived him as betraying their trust. He was abandoned even by his liberal companions. Following this, Davis attended a Jesse Jackson Operation Push performance, but the audience booed him as he came on stage. It was a devastating time. Davis would go on to say, "If your own people turn you away, then all the money, diamonds, and fame mean nothing." He never quite fit in, being considered either too black for some or not black enough for others. Sammy Davis Jr. was more than only a legend in the entertainment industry by the late 1970s. He was also crumbling from the inside out. His cocaine habit escalated from a means to manage his hectic schedule to a $40,000 a month expenditure. His drug and alcohol use was evident as he stayed up for days on end. His cardiac attack occurred in 1974. Rather of serving as a wake-up call, it failed to do so. His performances deteriorated to the point where he forgot words and acted strangely on stage. In 1978, he even passed out in front of a live Las Vegas audience. He relapsed quickly after completing rehab. In 1983, his liver had deteriorated to the point that physicians feared that he may die from just one more drink. In 1985, when his career and life were hanging in the balance, he made up his mind to become clean. However, he had other vices as well. Concurrently, Sammy's obsession with pornography reached a level that even his closest friends found disturbing. At parties, backstage, and even in the dressing rooms before concerts, he would play the over 200 pornographic videos he had stashed in a trunk. The crazy parties that took place at his Beverly Hills house were known for drug use, sex, and endless pornographic film marathons. Adult film stars like Linda Lovelace allegedly taught him how to use the projection system he set up above his bed. His 1977 softcore film appearance was Linda Lovelace for President. Damage had already been done, even though the sequences were deleted. During his theatrical performances, he would make the audience feel uneasy by making jokes about his preoccupation. Worst of all, his marriage became a reflection of his lifestyle. Sammy wed Altovise Gore in 1970, but their marriage swiftly became into a poisonous one due to his porn addiction and desire for adventurous encounters. Altovise felt abused and humiliated because he forced her into sexual situations. At gatherings, he wanted to play out sexual scenes, engage random people, and even switch partners. He coerced her into a fan-initiated trio in 1975. Afterwards, he coerced her into posing for sexually graphic images, which he then shared with others without her knowledge or consent. He attempted to get her involved in a horrific conduct with a dog at a party in 1983, which sent things spiraling out of control. They made up in the end, but the emotional scars were never quite healed. His physique started to deteriorate as he got older. The guy whose tap dancing had previously captivated audiences across the world was now clumsy and uncoordinated. He had open hip replacement surgery in 1985. Not only did he incur financial losses, but even upon his return, something seemed off. His motions were rigid and restricted. He underwent a total hip replacement in 1987. The public's recollection of Sammy Davis Jr. ended there. When he attempted his trademark sliding split at a 1988 performance, the audience went silent. He ended up finishing the show while seated on a stool after collapsing in agony. For Sammy Davis Jr., what began as an ordinary doctor's appointment in September 1989 quickly became a living nightmare. He was anticipating a speedy medical evaluation that would confirm his health status. Instead, a life-altering diagnosis of throat cancer was made by the doctors. The illness had already spread by the time someone noticed it. Sammy had an optimistic outlook, assuring the media that he would return to the stage before year's end. Behind the scenes, though, he was already having trouble. While on tour with Frank Sinatra and Liza Minnelli, he suffered from hoarseness, swallowing difficulties, and barely managed to get through his concerts. However, the audience members were unaware. His fear of disappointing others drove him to keep smiling and singing even while he endured excruciating agony. Still, he spoke softly to his valet, saying, "I know what this is." Having spent his whole life trying to earn half the credit, he knew that displaying weakness was not an option. An additional, non-medical burden weighed heavily on Sammy. He was still on the minds of the crowd. He has been involved in dubious transactions with organized criminal groups, particularly in Vegas, for decades. While some had aided his career, others had taken advantage of him. They came knocking again as his condition deteriorated. His Beverly Hills house began to be visited by mafia connections in early 1990. Debts from gaming and protection costs from a long time ago owing him money. He reportedly lost 40 grand in a single night. There was no way out of the tight pressure. These men weren't only furious, they possessed authority and were adept at wielding it. Documents pertaining to Davis's kidnapping and subsequent blackmailing date back to the 1960s, according to the FBI. They wanted their money now that his health was deteriorating. Not for the sake of vanity, but for the sake of his very existence, he persisted on performing. Those in his inner circle confessed that the booking of events was a ploy to pay off the mafia with rapid cash. Despite his physical pain, the performance had to continue. Frank Sinatra, who had been Sammy's brother, finally snapped. He delivered a check for $500,000 to Sammy's residence by December. He said he had contributed to paying the over $5 million in IRS liabilities. He pleaded with Sammy to take a break, relax, and allow his pals to pitch in. However, Sammy declined. He was too proud, but proud all the same. Even though Sinatra had covered his medical expenses following that terrible automobile accident in 1950, Sammy still despised being reliant on anybody. He insisted on doing everything by himself, right up until the very end. As Sammy's condition deteriorated, Sinatra opted to be at his side and canceled all of his own concerts. Many paid homage to Sammy after his death on May 16, 1990. While his contributions to the music industry, film, and civil rights were well publicized, his enormous debt was mostly ignored. Despite having a successful 60-year career in show business, he racked up an enormous tax debt of over $5 million, with penalties and interest adding up to nearly $7 million. His little estate, valued at about $4 million, was far from sufficient. Everything he had, including his tap shoes, was put up for auction by his wife, Altaviz. Even at $111,000 for a single pair, that wasn't enough. Some of the individuals he trusted were looting him as he lay dying, taking his clothing, jewels, and other valuable possessions from his house. The sale of his Beverly Hills home was inevitable. Unfortunately, his plan to give a museum his weapons collection never materialized. Their debts devoured everything. One little gesture on his behalf was made by Las Vegas. For 10 minutes, the lights on the Strip were turned off. Only Martin Luther King Jr. and John F. Kennedy had ever done that before. Despite the magnificent gesture, the man who had delighted millions ultimately passed away in a state of brokenness and agony, while still attempting to deliver a final performance.